Hello, welcome to Priestessing the Priestesses, episode 10. And here we are, October 1st, 2020, aka the 14th of Tishrei, 5781 on the Hebrew calendar. We're in a new year in the Hebrew calendar.
Episode 10 of Priestessing the Priestesses.
Indeed. I'm Kohenet Matan, and I'm here with Kohenet Devorah Grenn.
And we're happy to be back.
Yeah, well, you don't know that we've been away necessarily, but we've had a few weeks where, you know, like the world and our lives have dictated that we not worry about recording this. And it just felt like it's time for us to be back. So here we are. And I think we might talk about leadership in priestessing and rest and maybe some of what's happening at this time of year on the Hebrew calendar.
The renewal of preparing for this Shemitah year, which maybe you want to explain.
Yes, sure. So so what we do every time we're going to meet is first we log on and we schmooze and we decide, you know, what's up, what feels loud to share with you all. And I was telling Devorah that this year is the first year in 7 years that I did not lead any High Holy Day, Jewish High Holy Day services. So usually I lead things for Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Return or Atonement. And I had mentioned this to a friend who's in the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Training Program, and she said, oh, it's your Shemitah year, because there's this biblical idea, this is where we get sabbatical from, that the 7th year is a year of rest for the land, where we let the land lie fallow and just like receive and be nurtured and renewed. And in the Hebrew calendar, the Jewish calendar, we are actually in year 6, which is preparation for Shemitah, which when I think about that in my schedule, I'm like, oh yeah, last year feels like that for me. And my mentor, Judith Manriquez, when I told her, oh yeah, I really love this idea of like, I'm taking an intentional break now from my Jewish communal leadership work, so that I can focus on rest and renewal and professional development. And she said, well, how perfect that the Hebrew calendar has Shemitah coming next year, because I will be coming out of this time of rest and renewal in time to support my community and be able to model really like how we do it. So I'll get to take the lessons I'm learning in this year when I'm resting and offer them to those who will be resting on the traditional cycle.
Yes.
And the other thing
Go ahead.
and just one more thing I want to add that you highlighted, Devorah, is I've been feeling a lot of discomfort with, I mean, partly from pandemic and having to be on Zoom. A lot of discomfort was showing up in communal religious spaces lately because I'm trying to figure my own stuff out. And I was saying, I think maybe I need to step away from my tradition in order to find myself in it, or in order to give like room for things to evolve without me feeling so striving, like feeling like I have to strive to push change. It's like, what if I just step back and witness the evolution that's happening without my requirement to make it happen? And that I think would be very healing for me. And you mentioned...
Well, it occurs to me, hearing you now, that on the other calendar and that many people follow in this country, we are in the Shemitah year already because of the pandemic, that we are in an enforced year of laying fallow and going more deeply within. And part of what I'm taking from these beautiful doors that are behind me today is, you know, seeing them in part as portals to different places.
Yes.
And, you know, this is a time to explore what those portals in our own lives might be and what opportunities this period, which can also be very difficult, can present in terms of the time it gives us to think about what we really want, who we really are, you know, what path we're on, and are we really following our dreams, our goals, our deepest passions. In response, though, I want to come back, so I don't forget it, to what you just said about this idea of stepping away from the tradition so that you can find yourself in it. As I told you, reminds me of Judith Plaskow's book many years ago of Standing Again at Sinai, which asked the question about Judaism, but I think it applies to every religious or spiritual tradition, because we go through different phases in terms of our relationships with traditions we were raised with, if any. And that is, do we want to make change within the institution, within the religion? And can that be done? Or do we need to step out of it to make change? And I think that's something we're grappling with. You know, we are God wrestlers, as we know. And I think it's through, however we do that, however we call that question, I think it's something that we often grapple with. And many people are doing that now, especially, I think, in light of 207,000 COVID deaths in this country, in light of a very scary political situation in which fascism, neo-Nazism, even racism certainly, and greater misogyny and sexism and homophobia than almost ever before are being revealed, which is a good thing in a way, so that we know what kind of action to take, and is also a scary time. I think it has a lot of people reevaluating many things, especially their own positions and where they stand and where they are ready to take a stand, even if they have not been activists, let's say, in any sense of the word till now. Go ahead.
I just want to pick up on when you say like greater levels of these things than we've experienced before are now being revealed. And I want to not like sort of challenge that and say, like, actually these levels have been there the whole time. What's different is that we're finally awake.
Right.
You know, like we've known our whole lives as women about gender-based violence.
Sure. And
that the world is misogynist and sexist. Right. And we've just been like screaming at walls about our experiences, and now it just seems like the mainstream is waking up and being like, oh yeah, the world's misogynist, you know, this society is misogynist.
Awareness, right.
Right. There's a greater awareness, and I think it's really important to name that, because that's a good thing.
Yes.
Like the shaking awake of the populace, so that we are able to see, like, there's a lifting of the veil that's happened. It's not that there's more homophobia, sexism, racism, white supremacy, colonialism than there was before. It's the same amount, if not less in some ways than before, but now we're not deaf and pardon me, I don't want to use actually this ableist language. Like now we're not asleep. We're not apathetic.
Right.
We are tuning in and waking up and paying attention. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I wrote about, and I think I may have even said it sometimes as if we're in a coma, when I wrote about sexism and misogyny and demonization of strong women in my book, Lilith's Fire, which came out of my thesis about Lilith, the first woman before Eve. Yes, we're aware. Nobody can say they're not aware now. And it's just really interesting to see the positions people take, isn't it? And the justifications that arise.
Yeah, and I mean, I love you saying nobody can say that they're not aware, but there are people who are still saying it.
Or are not aware.
You know, or are not aware. Like I have a friend, a dear friend, who is, you know, an attractive white man who lives on the East Coast, who like doesn't understand what privilege means. And he's like, well, you know, we shouldn't use that word because like I had to work really hard to get where I am. And I was like, yeah, okay, so you can share with me, tell me your story, like tell me why you feel privilege is not a thing. And he shared it with me, and I was like, okay, like you worked really hard. You had a lot of challenges you had to overcome to get where you were. And then I was like, and I just want to say, like, you know, at that time when you got a break, like you got a loan that enabled you to get the education that enabled you to get, and I was like, I've never gotten the loan without my parents co-signing. And like, that happened in his mid-20s. And I was like, hey, you got all the way there without ever having been sexually assaulted. I mean, that's an assumption. But if you were a woman, chances are, like, and I said, for me, like when I was that age, I'd already been through 3 major sexual assaults in my life. And that's an example of male, like you have lived male privilege.
Right.
And as an attractive male, like people give you things, like say yes to you, an attractive white male in, you know, dominant culture.
Right.
So even he is like, oh, I've never thought about that before.
Right. And
it feels really weird to me. I'm like, how can you miss it?
Oh, I know. And even like 30 or 40 years ago, and probably less in some states, a woman couldn't have gotten that loan without her husband's signature. I was just
or, you know, or her parents, right?
Right. Right.
Right. And we're still in a place where, like, oh gosh, I feel like I'm almost going to say, don't even get me started. But I want to say, you know, the medical system is, you know, what are like the big institutions, right? Like medicine, law, academia, religion, you know, to name the biggest ones that I can think of that still.
The military.
Oh, the military, of course. Yeah, I have being in Canada, I have so little experience with the military. But yeah, and, you know, these are all institutions where being a woman is, in some cases, dangerous.
Right.
You know, where we're still like, what is the word? Like, we're still making the path for ourselves today. After millennia, it's been such a short time that our experiences have even been considered in, and this is not just women, you know, we're 2 white women speaking, right? So like, I want to name also that for racialized folks, like these environments are extremely challenging and dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And here in Canada, you know, we're really aware also of Indigenous folks, and even today, like the anti-Indigenous racism is horrific. Yeah. And these things, I'm grateful, and I feel weird saying this, but like, I'm glad to be awake, because it's only when we are awake that we can do something about these systems, institutions, and structures, that we can find compassion for ourselves and those of us who have been banging our heads against the walls of these institutions, and that we can get head up enough to make change.
Yeah, I also want to add in the entertainment industry and the media industry, which is, I think, all very difficult places for women to work. And certainly we have an awareness, and I hope a conscious effort to change things for our Indigenous populations as well as for people of color. I do see some basic foundational policy changes happening on college campuses, for example, but there is so much to be done. But another place I'm seeing some immediate response is in putting forward Black voices and other voices that have been marginalized in terms of who's leading webinars and workshops, who's being hired to teach, and so on. So that's, that I see happening quickly, finally now. So of course it isn't quickly, it's taken decades, but it's actually, you know, it's actually happening now instead of, I mean, I'm sure there's still a lot of lip service, but I'm also seeing it actually taking place.
Yeah, and I'm part of a group on Facebook called Year of the Jewish Woman, and we're now in the 3rd year of the existence of this group. And Rachel Gildener, who founded the group, said it's still the year of the Jewish women and allies. Huh. And people are sharing examples constantly, like sharing examples of manels, of you know, panels of experts that have no women on them, and panels of experts in the Jewish community that have only white faces on them. And I really appreciate the vigilance to say, hey, who can call? Like, folks, like, let's challenge, like, who's running this? How do we get in touch with them? How do we say why? Why this? Why this group of people? How did you make these choices? How can we do better?
Right, and bringing in these other voices, where we saw again the other day somebody putting a conference together said nobody, I think it was like no African American was invited because they couldn't find anybody, which I've heard for years. We've all heard this for years. So they couldn't find a Jewish scholar to speak on a very Jewish topic. So I think at least there's more awareness around that, and no tolerance, I think, by many of us for it, so that we're challenging, those in power to rethink and not just rethink, but act accordingly to what is equal, what will bring equity. Yes.
In other words, this isn't the thread I thought that we were going to go down, or like the path I thought we were going to go down. I wanted to share something about caretaking, and I'm curious to see, I'm going to say it and hope that and trust that it'll wind its way back around, so that all of this will become connected. And I think I have an inkling of how that can happen. I want to say, like, one of the reasons that I'm taking a step back in my leadership is that I'm realizing that I've really shaped my work in the world and my life around the value that I thought, how do I say this, around caretaking others. And I thought that this was my job in service as a leader. Like, this was the model I had, especially as a woman. And I'm, I've been through a lot in my personal life in the last year, as my marriage ended about a year ago. And I'm realizing, wow, like, look at all these choices I made around the value of myself as a caretaker, and the way that I derived my own sense of self and value of, like, I am valuable because of how well I take care of others. And I feel like I'm going through this transition right now, where I'm seeing, like, wait, this is sort of a classic patriarchal trope, right? Like, oh, you're a woman, your job is to be a caretaker. And I'm like, well, what does my leadership look like if I'm not here just to take care of others? And if I learn how to take care of myself and prioritize taking care of myself, and ask to be taken care of, which is a thing I was never taught to do. In fact, I was told not to do, right? Like, the conditioning, especially for women, for a lot of folks, but especially for women, is like, you take care of everyone before yourself, and you might not get a turn in the end. Like, you pour out your cup. If there's a drop left for you, so be it. If not, you live on fumes. And I've just reached this place in my life where I'm like, I don't know how to show up anymore when my priority isn't caretaking. So I want to take a step back and focus on self-care, on priestessing myself. And just, like, learn what that feels like. What does it feel like to receive care? What does it feel like to make sure my cup is full to overflowing? We've talked about this before. Our cup needs to be full to overflowing, and we share the overflow rather than sharing from our own cup. So that's sort of where I am. And I believe that this is part of the paradigm shift that we're living through, where all of us need to notice when we are not okay, and prioritize our body's needs, our own energy field's needs, knowing that when our cup is full, when we are fully resourced, then we can share our resources and lift everybody up. But when we're all running on fumes, or when most of us are running on fumes, we're constantly in that place of rushing and striving and struggling. And we just
ourselves, completely deplete ourselves, and endangering our immune systems, our psychic space, and certainly our spiritual selves.
Right. So when we think about how powerful we are and have been while running on fumes for millennia, because that's what capitalism has taught us, really, is like, just do it even if it hurts, survive it. When you think of what we've accomplished on fumes, imagine what we can do when we are fully resourced.
Yes, renewable energy comes to mind.
Right? Sustainable, renewable energy.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm learning. And I'm just thinking about, like, the systems that we are talking about here, what happens to the medical system, the media, the entertainment industry, academia, religion, government, the military, what are the other ones? You know, like all the big institutions, when fully resourced people of all genders, of all backgrounds and ethnicities and orientations, when we are all fully resourced and we can show up with all of our experience and expertise and skills and energy to affect transformation, I think we can, it's going to happen big and fast. And that's what this Shemitah, I think I hear you about this year being a Shemitah year, but I actually wonder if this wasn't year 6. Mm-hmm. Because we know, or because we're being told anyway, that we're not going to be through it for a while. So we're just learning how to take care of ourselves now. We're learning how to rest so that we can go into the next phase with hopefully, you know, the power and desire and the actions that will, I want to say, like, the systems right now of employment and healthcare and like that force people to work when they're sick and force people to work to be taken care of and to take care of their families. Like, we can see the gap in the haves and the have-nots, and clearly that scaffolding, that system that reinforces that gap needs to be broken apart.
Right.
And we haven't done it yet. It's still coming. And
there has to be an appreciation of the role that we play, and us coming back at full strength and standing in our own power will also be threatening to some. And I think we have to be prepared for that, and have to, although we get really tired of educating people on this, about issues like privilege, I think we have to find ways to do it that don't put people on the defensive, and they have to open their minds also to hearing it, because it can't just be our job. And we really don't want to keep pussyfooting around, walking on eggshells, afraid that will hurt egos and you know, feelings. But because that infringes on how we stand in our power, right? And what I'm working on with a friend is a series on anger and women's anger, and the power and creativity that is living in that, or could be. And so this is part of the exploration for me. And I think it would not have come to the surface if I wasn't in this period also of deeper reflection and of, as you said before, going more into a personal space than necessarily a communal one, which we were maybe grappling with a bit over the high holidays, whether how to worship, with whom, with how many, or did we just need to be alone? I needed to be alone a lot, even though I also love being in community. So all of that, all of that combined, finding where we can be most fully resourced in a healthy way without feeling selfish. I think that's the other thing women still have to get over, not feeling that, taking that time for ourselves and that space, especially if we're in a daily relationship, how to do that without feeling selfish, but how to feel that this is a survival tactic at this point, as far as I'm concerned, because of all the layers, at least in the US, all the layers of complexity, shall we say, and trauma that we are encountering. The only way to get through it, I think, is to have some of that time to really explore inside. And that means quiet, that means times of silence that are honored, times away that are honored and supported by our partners and our families.
Yes, and as we've been talking about this, I'm just thinking again of that gap, and thinking until frontline workers, until working class folks who work on minimum wage, until they can rest safely, until they can take a break and be taken care of, we are not there. Right. So it's all well and good for those of us who are in privileged enough positions that I work from home and I have flexible hours and I'm not at risk and my kid is not at risk. And, there's no one in my family at risk, which is really amazing. In my bubble, my pod, my among the people that I spend time with. I know that's not the case for you, Deborah, in your family, in your household. You folks are you're feeling like you need to be a lot more careful than I am. But also, I don't have to go to a job every day that puts me in front of other people and in, close proximity, or, where I have to encounter the possibility of being sick.
Right.
And if I need to take time off, I'll be okay.
Right.
And even for folks who go to jobs where they're not at high risk, maybe they can't take time off, which means, and then maybe they have to cover for somebody else. And, you know, I'm just aware that I'm speaking from a distance and a place of privilege.
Some of the people in service businesses here and in hospitality industry, and especially in the restaurant industry, get very little.
Bars.
Can have their jobs threatened if they want even a lunch hour, things that are legal requirements. So they're not getting enough breaks. They're not possibly getting enough pay. And I have, for example, a student who has encountered a lot of sexual harassment and innuendo at her workplace and reported the supervisor. And so it was given to human resources and nothing has been done. And she is suffering the, I'm not even sure what the correct word is, but it's been noticed by her co-workers, and they're acting weirdly towards her. So, you know, in a time now when it's really hard to, in a way, to gather certain resources, and the jobs become so much more important for people who are part of working class families where maybe half the family's been laid off or fired. It is just, yes, I really hear what you're saying, and I'm very, very aware of the people who are in positions that without which we couldn't live. We couldn't get our food. We couldn't get our groceries, on whom we really are depending, who are still not fully compensated or certainly don't have adequate health care benefits. Yeah, not supported in a variety of ways.
So my hope is that those of us who have the space and privilege to rest and get resourced, like that we will do it so that we can show up for the ones who can't, and then make space for them to do it too. And, you know, so like I'm like, okay, this is what I can do. I'm making that space for myself. And my community Living from the Heart is about teaching all of us how to take care of ourselves and our families, like from this place of valuing rest and valuing self-care, oxygen mask principle, right? And then, you know, getting to the point, hopefully a little quicker than we would have if we weren't here, of having full to overflowing cups, so we can turn all of this abundant energy towards affecting change. And I think some are ahead of the game, you know, where I see it happening in waves, and I'm grateful to those who are on the front lines in activism and working to affect change in legislation, you know, putting their bodies on the line. And like, we all have our different place in the revolution. And I'm hoping that the more those of us who have the ability to get resourced to do, the more we'll be able to show up for others so that the waves will keep shifting.
Yeah. I just want to call out one group before we close, and that is, I don't know if you have it there, it's called the NAP Ministry. That you've heard of them, and they. I
have. I follow them on Instagram.
Yeah. So I think that's a great invention, and probably a group and a principle we could learn from, and have to in this time, because if we don't know how to rest, we're going to go crazy. You know, some people who cannot stand being inside and locked inside and are used to being very social. I met recently with a domestic violence advocate who is having a difficult time because they are very social, and you know, to not be able to have that kind of contact also takes a toll. But anyway, yes, we've covered a wide range that we hadn't necessarily anticipated, but I love that that's always what happens, I think, when we meet. And I just would urge and encourage everyone to take some time for themselves, even if you have kids, even if you are working outside and you don't have a bit of strength or energy. There could certainly be a day when you ask someone else in the household to prepare the food so that you can take half an hour to go lie down or just go for a walk. And I know that's easier said than done, but that's my final wish.
Yeah, and I would say for those of us who feel like we have extra to give, offer it. Like, look at who in your circle, whether in your household or the spheres that support you or around you, who could you give some release to in some way so that they can lie down. And I know that some of us feel like, oh, I wish I would be at a point where I had more to offer, you know, that I would have overflow. And there are others who are like, yeah, I'm doing fine. So if you're one of those people who are doing fine, look around and see, you know, who could use some of the elixir of rest that you have overflowing from your cup. This is how we build community, and this is how we raise each other up.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to that, that if, for those who feel they have nothing to give, they may be thinking of financial, but we all have time. I think, you know, that we all can find a half hour to give somebody. And if that could help keep somebody sane, give them some relief from kids who maybe they're homeschooling, or kids they have to feed the minute they get in from a grueling job on their feet for 10 hours. Yeah, we have time usually to give, I think.
Yeah. And if you don't, that's okay. And if you do, like, that's what I was thinking, was if you have time, offer that time, you know, some relief, financial or time or logistical, you know, mental and emotional labor are a thing, decision fatigue is a thing. And these are things that mostly are carried by women and racialized folks. So, you know, pay attention if you're aware that you're doing okay and you have more to give, see who can you give it to and offer freely. And then for those of us who have trouble accepting, practice saying yes when you're offered something you need.
Thank you. That's a very good point too.
All right, so we wish you all, for those who are marking the Jewish New Year, Happy New Year, and Shabbat Shalom, a good Sabbath and a beautiful weekend.
And for all of you, an encouragement to please call or contact, exhort, whatever pressure you have, whatever influence, I should say, on friends and family to vote, and to be sure they're registered, and to vote and vote and vote. I wish we could do it 3 times.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. I mean, yeah. Amen.
Amen. Blessings.
Okay.